Welcome to Nobilis Erotica episode 371. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by Circlet Press, the world's leading publisher of erotic science fiction and fantasy since 1992. Celebrate the erotic imagination with them at circlet.com. In this episode, we present the second annual Circlet Press Editorial Retreat live reading. For those of you who have been listening faithfully, you may remember that last year around this time, I came back from the Circlet Press Editorial Retreat with a recording from their live readings. Circumstances prevented my attendance this year, but luckily they recorded the session and sent it down for you to enjoy. So here we go.
All right. Hello. I'm Cecilia Tan, and you're not. Welcome to my house and to my writer's retreat and to hopefully a wonderful celebration of the erotic arts and fiction and creativity and whatnot. And even if you don't write erotica, you know, everyone's welcome here, except that there's really only room for about 20 of you in the living room here. So what I'm going to read tonight is an excerpt from a new project I've been working on called Geek Actually. It is a serial fiction project that I'm launching in June at Serial Box Publishing. So this is they call themselves the HBO for fiction. It's an online site and mobile app where you can, and they do all different genres. And this one is basically a women's fiction thing that I'm co-writing with Kathy Yardley, Melissa Blue, and Rachel Stuhler. And it's like if Sex and the City were about nerd girls in the internet. The main character in this piece I'm going to read is Michelle. She's basically the slightly uptight editor at a science fiction publishing house, kind of overachiever type. No, we don't know anyone like that.
You're not uptight.
No, I'm not, but I would have been if I made the career choices that Michelle made. Her husband's just left her, and she's at a romance writers conference to support one of her authors, and then she meets this hot dom presenter and his slave, and now she's attending their BDSM workshop. The room was crowded, and it wasn't a small room either. BDSM really was a hot topic, apparently, as hundreds of women and a few men took their seats. Michelle made her way almost all the way to the front before she found a seat in the second row. On the low stage, Richard was talking to Felice, saying something into her ear that made her giggle, and then he cupped her face with one hand. Felice looked into his eyes with an expression Michelle wasn't sure she'd ever seen in real life. Radiant devotion. Richard returned the look with a kind of blazing indulgence. I want that. Michelle was unaware how hard she was gripping the program book in her hands. Although the room was buzzing and hundreds of people were there, Richard and Felice appeared to be in their own little bubble, utterly consumed in each other. Richard took a step back from Felice and drew himself up to his full height. That turned some heads. And then when he pointed to a spot on the stage and Felice sank gracefully to her knees, a hush started at the front of the room and swept over, taking Michelle's breath with it. That was something like a magic trick, making 500 chatting women fall silent with only a gesture. Richard was mic'd. He touched the clip on the back of his belt and spoke without preamble, his voice filling the room. Some people, when they see a dom-sub relationship, see authority in the bedroom. They see power. They see cruelty. You know what I see? Michelle was sure she wasn't the only one holding her breath to hear the answer. Richard gazed dotingly at Felice, who basked in his attention. I see love. Audible sighs came from somewhere behind her. Michelle held in a sigh but rolled her eyes, the cynical part of her insisting that the word love simply couldn't be used so baldly. Too facile, too on point. He went on. I see two people who have bonded their souls at the deepest level. I see a woman who I don't merely believe will walk through fire for me. I know it, because she's done it. When we play with pain or bondage or denial, with fire or leather or chain, we push the limits of our physical selves, which pushes the limits of our inner selves, whatever word you want to use for that. Our hearts, our souls, our spirits, our minds, our ideas of self and each other. That made a scary amount of sense, Michelle thought. Love is strongest when it's tested. Some couples climb mountains together. Some meet the challenge of raising children together. Whatever test you set for yourselves, when you pass it together, your bonds grow stronger. When Michelle thought of tests in her marriage, the tests are always of patience or tolerance, like, could she stand another harangue about her cooking? A test you pass together. What did he mean by that? Wasn't it the dom who set forth tests for the sub to pass? I'm going to skip a little bit. When the Q&I time came, her hand shot upward. Yes, Richard said, calling on her with a warm recognition in his smile, indicating she should stand. He remembers me. Earlier you talked about a test that you pass together, but isn't the sub the one who passes the test the dom invents? His smile turned almost indulgent, as if this were one of his favorite lessons to teach, and Michelle felt goosebumps rise across her shoulders. Would you be willing to take part in a little demonstration? Richard said. Yes, Michelle said, before she could think about it. The other women in her row moved their legs aside so she could make her way to the aisle and then onto the stage. Goodness, there were a lot of people filling that ballroom. She could feel all their eyes on her. But then there was Richard's voice. Look at me. And it seemed as if his eyes were suddenly the only ones in the room. Felice, lie down at the edge of the stage. Yes, sir, Felice said from behind her. Michelle, may I tie your hands loosely for purposes of this demonstration? His tie was still warm from his body, making the demonstration suddenly more intimate than she'd expected, a detail only she could discern. Her breath stuttered in her lungs. Could he tell how nervous she already was? He probably felt the trembling in her hands as he turned her to face the back of the stage. Then she could hear pen against paper and the sound of paper folding. Michelle, turn around. She did as asked, and she saw 3 pieces of folded paper, each standing like a hat atop Felice's body. One was between her breasts, one was on her stomach, and one was on her thighs, very close to her crotch. I've written 1 request on each paper. One is something I want. One is something Felice wants. And one lets you ask for what you want. Michelle felt her heart race. So this was the test about whether she would go through with it, right? The only way to fail was to back down. Pick one up with your mouth and deliver it to me. That's all. Okay. She lowered herself carefully to the stage next to Felice, no easy feat with the slightly tight suit skirt she was wearing and her bound hands unable to counterbalance her. But which paper to choose? The one balanced on Felice's fine corset was probably the safest choice, at least in that picking it up with her mouth wouldn't look too embarrassingly sexual for a public demonstration. Except what were the chances that was the paper that had the safe choice on it? She had the middle paper in her mouth before the thought struck her, wait, which option do I consider the safe choice? Her heart felt like it was beating her throat as she tried to stand up gracefully. Well, she stood up at least, and faced Richard, wondering if he could read all the churning emotions inside her. Trepidation, attraction, the exhilaration of being in public mixed with the confusion of wondering why she'd agreed to do this demonstration at all. Thank you, Richard said, with a slight nod as he plucked the paper from her lips. You did very well. A surge of excitement ran through her, his approval pouring through her like a sweet intoxicant. Maybe that explained why tests were a thing. And then he opened the paper. You chose the one that lets you have anything you want, so tell me, what's your heart's desire? For you to kiss me and tell me I did well, she thought, but she couldn't say that. She couldn't let him kiss her in front of this whole room of people, and couldn't admit that inside what she craved most was to be patted on the head like a schoolgirl. But wait. What I want most is... She had it. She knew exactly what to answer. To pass the test. Richard beamed. Aha! And that, my dear, you have done with flying colors. May I untie you? As Richard reclaimed his tie, she felt herself smiling, unsure exactly why, but she felt both relieved and proud of herself for being clever, for being bold enough to get up there, even if she wasn't really sure what lesson she was supposed to have learned. None of it really made sense, but she was flushed with euphoria and arousal. Now, Richard said with a flourish, picking up the other 2 pieces of paper and helping Felice to her feet, would you like to see what the other pieces of paper said? Clapping from the audience made it clear he was addressing them. He unfolded both and held them aloft, turning them back and forth to gasps and ohs from the audience. They were both blank. They were all blank. Michelle felt her throat tighten as surprise hit her. So it wasn't a test after all? On the contrary, I tested your obedience, your resolve, your agility, your decision-making, and your desire. And your results pleased me very well. Thank you.
Don't want to be recorded. Stay here.
I feel like somebody should be humming music while we have these technical difficulties. gotta be a stripped down version of an otherwise good song. Like, Welcome to the
I
Jungle.
heard Comfortably Numb once.
I heard it in the dentist, but that was the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah. How's about the Zombie Jamboree?
Let's.
Well, you're generally constant.
All right. Next up, we've got. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'll introduce myself. It's not a secret. Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. I'm Dan Kimmel. I write for Circlet under the name D. Mark Alderton. This is from a book that came out last year that I co-edited with Bethany Zayatz called Like a Circlet Editor, which is fantasies about the Circlet Press. I have 2 stories in the book, and I'm going to read, well, until they stop me. I think it's over 1,000 words. The last story in the book called Editorial Conference. A vampire, an android, and a shapeshifter walk into a bar. It sounds like the start of a joke, but it was no joke for Sandra Allison, managing editor at Circlet Press. She was meeting 3 of her writers and had nothing but bad news to deliver. That's why they were meeting at a local bistro near the Circlet offices. If this went as she expected, they would all need something to ease the pain. Well, except for Alec, of course. If the vampire started slaking his thirst, the meeting would be going even worse than she expected. Vic, the droid, and Max, the shifter, ordered their drinks, and Sandra got her second dirty martini. This was not going to be fun, and since she lacked the requisite sadistic streak, she took no pleasure in delivering the bad news. They made some chit-chat until the drinks arrived. Then the 3 writers noted the glum look on the editor's face and went silent. Guys, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I think the 3 of you are all written out. Max, retaining his human shape, began to take on the attributes of a beagle. A lovable, floppy-eared beagle. What do you mean written out? We're 3 of your best contributors. Sandra sighed. She may as well get to the point. Yes, Max, you have been. You've written for numerous anthologies over the years, and it's gotten to the point that I know what your stories are about before I read them. Alec flashed his fangs, but then retracted them. Smoothly, he said, What's the problem, Sandra? Readers love erotic vampires. Even teenagers like us, although let me point out, I have never sparkled. Yes, that's true, Alec, but how many times can they take variations of the same plot? Vampire meets pretty young thing, seduces her, and makes her one of the undead. We need something new and different. I can make them both women, said Alec. Been there, done that. Both men? Alec, I know you're 200 years old, but have you already forgotten about that woman down in New Orleans? Gave vampires a soul last century. The vampire was becoming more agitated, but Vic reached out his arm and clasped Alec's shoulder. Then the droid turned to the editor. Everyone goes through a slump. Now, certainly my story is usable. Sandra turned her attention to the artificial man. 2 people have sex and then discover they're both human. Well, what's wrong with that? Have you ever looked at our list of don'ts? Yes, it says don't do a story when 2 people have sex and then one of them turns out to be a robot or alien or elf or whatever. I didn't do that. In fact, I did just the opposite. The characters think each other are androids and then discover they're both human. Vic beamed with satisfaction. Vic, said Sandra after draining her drink, it's a story about 2 human beings having straightforward sex. Where's the fantastic science fiction of fantasy? How is it any different than ordinary human porn? If the android could blush, it would have. I'm sorry, I thought that not doing the obvious would be enough. A pall of gloom settled over the table. Max, having shifted back into a male human form, had attempted to paste a smile on his face and only partially succeeded. What was wrong with my story, he asked, cutting to the chase. Oh, Max, don't take it personally. You've done dozens of shapeshifter stories. Men and women turn into the other or morph into some combination of both. One of the lovers is a wolf or a bear or a hamster, said Max. Yes, that was different, recalled Sandra with a smile. But that was 10 years ago, and you followed that up with shape-shifting into rabbits, cats, badgers, beavers, leered Alec. Although his heart wasn't in the smutty jibe. Sandra ignored the vampire. It's all been done. That's the problem. She waved her hand at the waiter passing by asking for another drink. The writers did not join her. We've been doing this for so long that it's getting harder and harder to find fresh angles. The gloom returned. Sandra hated bringing these writers bad news. She liked them. They had done a lot of good work. They certainly knew their material, but each seemed to have run out of steam. They were simply going through the motions. The waiter returned with Sandra's martini. No one said a word. There didn't seem to be anything more to say. None of them could meet the other's eyes. Finally, Alec broke the silence. "So what do we do to make it fresh, Sandra? Have sex with each other?" There was the briefest of pauses, and then Sandra waved for the waiter. "Check, please." And if you want to find out what happens next, like a Circlet editor.
Okay, so hi, I'm Sheila Lambert, and this is a story from Best Buy Short Stories. This was written by Storm Grant, and it's called Dual Citizenship. I have another meeting to go to, Detective Connor. I'm going to leave you alone for about 15 minutes. Captain Grandy stands, and I glance up at him. What kind of job interview is this? Sure, I want to be the American half of the Integrated Border Enforcement Team, but still. Grandy holds up the thin manila folder. I'm going to leave this confidential file on my desk. If you should choose to read it, I can't be held responsible now, can I? Okay, he's trying to tell me something. Is there something I should... Just read the file, Connor. 15 minutes, I'll be back. So I read the file. It's about the guy I'd be replacing, Detective Washington, plus some stuff about his Mountie partner. The file's pretty vague, but I managed to read between the lines. I'm sort of inclined that way. Good to his word, Grandy comes back in 15 minutes, asks me if I have any questions. I'm not sure where to start, so I go with silence, just looking at him. The silence stretches. Finally, Grandy says, the Mountie and Washington. They were pretty close. Spent a lot of time together, both on the job and off. Now that you've looked at the file, do you think you can work with this Mountie? I tap the file against my thigh, playing for time. I look just to the right of Grandy's shoulder, not making complete eye contact. So, the Mountie. Something queer about him? I say finally, careful of my wording. It's hard to ask when the rule is don't, as in don't ask, don't tell. Grandy harumphs. Won't meet my eyes directly either. He's probably wondering about the 2 holes in my left earlobe. Well, I think I can say for pretty sure that he's... Grandy pauses, searches for the right word, then does meet my eyes. Canadian. You don't have a problem with Canadians, do you? No, sir. Got a cousin who's Canadian. Not a problem. I failed to mention I've been to Canada a few times myself. Since splitting with the ex-wife. Thinking about this, it occurs to me to ask, was Detective Washington Canadian too? Grandy looks uncomfortable, that runs a finger inside his shirt collar, even though the top button is undone and his tie loosened. That's not an easy question, Connor. Washington may have had, dual citizenship. But if so, he kept it pretty quiet. To outward appearances, he was more your all-American boy. And that precludes what exactly I think. But out loud I say, no problem, Lieutenant. I've worked with persons of alternative nationality before. Even if he were to, say, invite you to visit Canada with him? Unbelievable. Grandy is actually blushing a little, again with the finger in his collar. Now, I've seen pictures of this Mountie. There were a couple in the file. And heard the gossip round the station, and my unspoken response to that is, I should be so lucky. I almost start to tell Grandy again that it would be no problem for me at all, but realize this might give away my game. So instead, I consider a while. I think the moment has come to lighten the mood a little, so I ask, half joking, "Just to be clear, sir, you're not asking me to immigrate, are you?" Or should that be emigrate? Don't know. Doesn't matter. I look at Grandy and he's gone the color of really good Merlot. Then he starts fiddling with his stapler behind him, loses his balance and nearly falls, knocking over his almost empty coffee cup as he regains his footing. No, detective. He mops up the spilled coffee with a wad of mismatched napkins, probably several years' worth of meals eaten at his desk. The Detroit Police Department would never make such an unethical demand of one of its officers. He trails off, realizing he's been plain speaking for a minute there. We would never ask anyone to apply for dual citizenship. I just want to make sure you can work with a Canadian. Grandy is really struggling now, and the evil part of me is kind of enjoying this. But that's not a good way to land this job, so I try to put him at ease. As an officer of the law, he's got to have the whole no means no thing down pat, right? And I hear Canadians are very polite. Grandy looks relieved. All right then. You've reassured me that you've got what it takes to do this job. Welcome aboard, detective. He holds out his hand and we shake. I like him already and think I'll enjoy working here. I hand back the file, feeling only a little bit guilty for having borrowed a really good picture of the Mountie and stuffing it in my jacket pocket when Grandy was out of the room. I tell myself I need it so I can identify my new partner when I see him, but it's really so I can take it home and enjoy it while I take a little solo trip to Canada.
You can find that in Best Buy Short Stories, edited by the fabulous Sheila Lambert. All right.
Thank you.
Part of the reason there's so much extra laughing is that several attendees are from Canada here.
Oh, okay.
In at least one sense.
At least, yes. Many of us have dual citizenship here. Yes. All right.
Some folks have quote-unquote dual citizenship.
Yes. Who's next? Let me put this down over here.
I'm Benny Tesla. I'm working. My big work in progress this year is a approximately 200-page graphic novel being serialized at eroticmadscience.com. It is inspired by Max Headroom, Chuck Tingle, and Pokemon Go.
Like you do.
This is from issue 1. It's you're getting a sneak preview of stuff that's going to be appearing in a couple of weeks. Our situation here involves the 3 hackers, Elizabeth, Viz, and John Smith, who are have received a sets of augmented reality glasses that they're currently wearing, which is why they're able to see virtual things there, and have somehow gotten sidetracked into discussions of masturbatory material, as one does. I thought it would be fun for me to read my script and then for us to look at the illustrations that resulted, to have the sort of experience that I had of trying to visualize it and then seeing what happened. Obviously, the visual's got a bit of a head start here. Panel 1. As Elizabeth and Viz shoot the breeze, John is surreptitiously slipping the tablet out of Viz's lap. His arms are a little longer and suppler than one might expect. Elizabeth. What about you, Viz? Taking your looks for our one-handed test rise? Viz. Porn is vulgar. I prefer literary erotica. Oh, classy. What writers? Viz. Well, I favor a broad range of writers. Hey, put that down! Panel 2. John is playing keep away with the tablet while scrolling through the screen. He's having a great deal of fun. Viz is not. Elizabeth is trying another password. This one is Fenis Nogrithum Lasto Bet Lamen. Once again, it need not be visible. John is reading from the tablet. The Drosomenophis... The Drosomenophis' Reluctant Bride by Biff Sparkleman. Taken by a horse-sized duck and 50 duck-sized horses. By Biff Sparkleman. The Chupacabra's Baby Mama. by Biff Sparkleman. This dude seems pretty prolific. Panel 3. Viz is so astonished he stops grabbing for his tablet. You've never heard of Biff Sparkleman? No. Elizabeth. Who? Panel 4. Viz is gesturing emphatically. Only the greatest writer of Kaiju Mantica the world has ever known. Next page. Splash pen. Not quite yet.
Okay.
Splash pen. A hand is holding a tablet computer to nearly fill the page. The screen is vertically divided into 2/3 text and 1/3 image. In the image, we are looking over the shoulder of a glamorous woman in a sexy, revealing dress. She is facing a gigantic duck, who is wearing a brocade smoking jacket, sitting in a wing chair and cradling a snifter. If he can assume a suave and sophisticated expression, great. If not, so be it. The on-screen art is in color, the framing image is not. Can we see his interpretation? I will not at this time read the full text, partially because it is deliberately bad. Next page. Panel 1. Elizabeth should probably not actually have a light ball over her head, but that's her affect. Wait, read me that again. John. Seriously? You want more of that? Panel 2. Elizabeth is very excited about something. John is tapping away on Viz's stolen tablet. Elizabeth. Okay, just email me the text. I want to check something out. John. Sure thing, boss. Panel 3. Elizabeth is typing furiously on her virtual keypad. Okay, I'm opening the file and... What the hell? Panel 4. Cuffy, from a previous comic, appears in the air in the middle of the room. A little X, like those in web ad pop-ups, appear near him. He is in color, though he's naturally pretty monochrome. Cuffy. Hi, you seem to be writing BDSM pornography. Would you like some tips on safe, sane, and consensual practices? Panel 1. Viz likes being the most knowledgeable one in the room. He's looking a little smug. Elizabeth is largely ignoring him with a look of intense concentration. Cuffy is just hanging there, beaming. Oh, you haven't seen Cuffy before? Yeah, he's a pretty new word feature. Remember those 50 Shades class action suits? John. All those people who injure themselves trying kinky romance novel shit? Panel 2. Viz nods vigorously. John is gaping at Cuffy. That's the one. Smile and corpse settled. But the terms had them taking action to cut the number of self-published novels with risky practices. So they put pressure on Microsoft. Cuffy. Coprophilia is generally considered a form of edge play. Risk mitigation techniques include... Panel 3. Close-up of John's hand reaching up and flicking Cuffy's X. Have you seen that? Panel 4. There's a small bright smear in the air where Cuffy was a moment ago. John is shaking his head and handing Viz's tablet back to him. Viz accepts it graciously. John. Jesus. Viz. These are the days of miracles and wonders. I think we'll stop there.
And people can find us at eroticmadscience.com. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, I am Michael M. Jones, and I'm going to be reading from Saturday Night Science, which can be found in the first issue of Broadswords and Blasters, Pulp magazine with modern sensibilities. On sale now. Broadswords and Blasters. There it is. When I said I didn't mind light bondage and roleplay, this isn't exactly what I expected. I gave the leather straps securing my wrists to the edge of the padded table another exploratory tug, though I know I couldn't break them or slip free. They were snug, stopping short of cutting off circulation in high quality. Not that I consider myself a connoisseur of such things, but you spend enough time online, you learn a lot of stuff you never expect to ever actually come in handy. Hush up, Camille. I'm at a very delicate stage on my calibrations, and you really don't want me to make a mistake at this point. Across the room, the woman in the artfully stained and burned white lab coat turned dials, flipped switches, and pulled levers. bringing a dizzying array of inexplicable mechanisms to life all around us, like a mad scientist's fevered nightmares. Lights flashed, widgets bleeped, and steam hissed, all working towards a purpose I couldn't even guess at. My wheelchair sat against the nearby wall, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did at the moment. This was not how I thought the night would turn out. I'd met Daphne Watson at PuxCon, the city's annual science fiction convention, when she stopped to admire my costume. Victorian Ghostbuster, with my chair incorporated as a mobile ghost-trapping device. I took second place in the costume contest, losing out to Darth Vader cape. I hate that person, but they smell amazing. With her lush curves, bright blue eyes, long blonde braids, and pale skin, I found her downright adorable. She'd also gone for a retro look, with corset, goggles, and gadgets galore. I told her how awesome her gear looked, and asked how she'd managed some of it. The conversation spun out from there as we bonded over a shared love of steampunk and fantastic Victoriana. She was charming, articulate, and passionate. When I realized that she also liked girls, I figured I'd hit the jackpot. As the night wore on, we both decided we didn't want things to end. Daphne said she lived nearby, and I threw caution to the wind. I hadn't had a date in months, and I was feeling pretty buzzed from good company and the promise of an even better time. It turned out that she lived on the top floor of a refurbished factory, part of a gentrification project to turn unused buildings into hip dwellings. Her place was sparse but comfortable, with much of the space given over to random bits of machinery and the sort of gadgetry that would have given a real scientist a turn green with envy. I oohed and awed over them, while she explained how she liked to tinker, making a living as a consultant for local tech firms. Sim things got heated. I'll spare you the details, but you could have cut his sexual tension with a knife. I wanted to take things much further, and she kicked that train of thought into high gear with an admission that she likes to spice things up. And could she tie me down pretty, please? And could we play mad scientist while we do it? Look, she patted her eyelashes at me, and I have needs, and this isn't the worst thing a potential Liz lover to ask me to do. If that's what it took to get lucky with this woman, I'd happily play the part of the not-so-unwilling victim. And that's how we ended up with me on her table, strapped down to my underwear, strapped down and ready for some action. Oh no, Doctor. Please don't swap my mind with that of a gorilla, I pleaded with a giggle. I'll never help you conquer the world. But then Daphne pressed several buttons, and her entire apartment underwent a bizarre transformation. Every surface rising, sinking, or revolving to reveal hidden machinery. As it became a humming, living thing, I wondered, what the hell I got myself into? She apologized while I struggled and protested for real, as though we were having a terrible misunderstanding. It was all, this shan't take long, and I'm really not going to hurt you, and I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. I quickly graduated to unforgivable language as I demanded she release me. She informed me there was no call for that, and how could anyone concentrate with that kind of racket? I chose sullen silence over the ball gag she showed me. For a little while, anyway. Curiosity won out. Could you at least tell me what's going on? Daphne sighed, turning away from her calculations and adjustments to look my way. Will you settle down if I do? Sure. I mentally crossed my fingers. Okay. She walked over to perch on a nearby stool. I'm going to attach some stuff to you. Nothing invasive, I promise. I designed this procedure to work with exposed skin. No opening up the skull and hot wiring the brain, thank goodness. I've always hated that sort of thing. All the blood and squishy bits make me squeamish. Science, not surgery, is my motto. She shuddered. On her, it was kind of cute. I made an undignified sound like a startled cat and tensed up again. I gave my restraints another tug. No luck. I said I wouldn't have to do that, she said. Anyway, once you're hooked up, I'll use it as a prism to access and isolate parallel dimensions and alternate timelines. I could explain it in detail, but the mechanics will be lost on you. It involves an advanced knowledge of about 5 different disciplines, most of which aren't even considered legitimate in your world. She muttered something rude about short-sighted ethics committees under her breath. Wait, what? And to make a long story short, things go very wrong, and that's when the universe exploded. I don't know what happens next. You'll have to pick up broadswords and blasters.
Can I catch that this is in the Pucks Hill continuity?
Of course.
PuxCon, yes.
mad science in here already.
We've had a couple of not explicit entries. We'll go over to mine, which is different. This is an excerpt from a novella that I've recently mostly finished, called Junk Magic, which is about a woman who picks up a genie lamp at a garage sale and then becomes his master, and sexy times ensue.
Hijinks ensue.
Yes. At this point in the story, she has established herself as kind of masterful, and they're trying out this new stage of their relationship. I carried the box into the room, trying to maintain my calm. Khalid lay on the bed naked, as requested. I gave his cheek a brief caress and opened the box. I brought out the straps and the narrow dildo, which had a mostly naturalistic look and feel to it, but with a flared base so it could be fitted into the cursory harness. I let him look and touch, and then I pulled out the bottle of lubricant. I pulled off the plastic seal and passed it to him. I want you to prepare yourself, I said. He looked at me blankly. What? Oh, come on. How did this fall to me? He was way older and more experienced. You know, to stretch yourself open so it doesn't hurt. A look of understanding came into his eyes, and he smiled. He arched up to press against me. Master, I am not human. I am a genie and possessed of incredible magic powers. Most of those powers are reined in by my bond of servitude and the way the magic funnels through really bad circumstances. But this I can do. I am ready now. I took off my clothes slowly, almost formally, setting them aside folded instead of tossing them to the floor like I would ordinarily. I put the dildo into the hoop on the harness. I showed Khalid how the straps went, and how there was a vibrator the size of a USB thumb drive that tucked in against my clit. When the harness around my hips was snug, I took the lube from him and slicked it generously along the length of the cock. I put my hand on his shoulder, and he willingly lay back for me, spreading his legs so I could kneel between them. He was hard, even untouched, and I thought of stroking him, but instead I reached lower, rubbing the sensitive area behind his balls, then lower, and rubbed my lube-slick fingers against his ass. I decided to take him at his word, and lined the cock up with his entrance. I rocked my hips forward slowly, and the head penetrated him easily. I looked up at him, and his eyes rolled back in his head. Yes, I like that. You are eager, aren't you? I said to him, edging forward at a careful pace. In 2 centimeters, out a centimeter, repeat. Yes, I want this now. I pushed forward into him until I bottomed out, the harness hoop pressed against his ass. I gently rocked back, then forward, then back, watching him shake beneath me. He really was eating this up. I kind of wished I had done it to him before. Then he adjusted his angle, and he made the most obscene noise, a wanton sexual sound the likes of which I'd never heard. He rolled his hips, fucking himself on the cock. I took the hint to begin thrusting in and out of him. He murmured incoherently in some dialect of Arabic. I paused a moment and reached into the harness to turn on the vibrator. Oh, that was heaven, watching as he let me penetrate his body, and the rhythmic vibrations hummed through me. Master, Khalid gasped, I've wanted you to take me like this. It feels so good to be filled. I feel such pity for human men who cannot bring themselves to try it, or find it does not bring them pleasure. It is exquisite. Then I will do it to you more often, I said. I pulled out abruptly, and he whimpered at me. I grinned at him and made a motion in the air. Turn over. I want to see if you like it from behind. I usually do, he said, and he disentangled his legs from mine and flipped over onto his stomach. He started to raise up on all fours, but I planted a hand between his shoulder blades and pushed him into the mattress. He could have easily resisted me, but he let me push him around. God, it was so hot when he obeyed me without me having to give him so much as a verbal command. Up on my knees, I slid the cock into him from behind, adding a little more lube as I went. He was right. He was far more adaptable than a human. He made obscene noises as I entered him and began fucking him at the same pace as the vibrator against my clit. It felt unbelievably good, watching my genie pant and moan before me while my climax built. This orgasm shook me to the core. I felt it seize upon me like a vice, making my muscles clench and shake. I rocked back and forth, coming as hard as I ever had in my life, without even having a cock inside me. Normally, I couldn't come just from clitoral stimulation on the outside, but this was heaven. When I'd regained control of myself again, I started working harder on Khalid, shifting angles until he cried out, yes, that was clearly it. Faster, please, he managed to say. I obliged him. I reached beneath him, grabbed his cock, and began pumping him at the same pace as my thrusts. Within moments, he was near screaming as he came over my fist, rocking back and forth to fuck himself on the cock and buck against my hand. I fucked him through it until he began to shake with aftershocks, and I withdrew and let him collapse onto his side, panting like he'd just run a marathon. I spooned up behind him, the cock still hard and slick and pressing against his balls from behind. When he'd recovered somewhat, he rolled onto his back and grinned lubily at me. Thank you, he said. That was exactly what I wanted. I am very pleased with the result, I said. How it affected us both. Would you like me to do this more often? I would like that very much. I need to observe, however, that I have not yet been allowed to go down on you. May I request the opportunity to do that next time? Hell, he could do that in a few minutes if you wanted to. I threw an arm around him. You absolutely may. You magical beast. Just in case we wondered what kind of retreat this was.
Yeah.
Okay, patrons. So I'm Becca, also known as Piper, and I actually do most of my storytelling and writing online with a bunch of dear friends who like the same kind of things I do. That said, although we all love smut, this is a bedtime story, and it's just a tiny bit romantic. So I'll read it. It's called Goldfish. Once upon a time, there was a little fish named Nori. He was nominally a goldfish, although people sometimes said he was really brown, and he insisted he was actually copper. Anyway, as you know, goldfish aren't called that because of their color, but because they can turn things into gold. So dwarves think they are very special, although they also wonder if they actually exist because such a thing is not chemically plausible at all. One morning, after a night spent up arguing with friends at the tavern about goldfish, Dwalin decided he would go fishing and see if he could find one. His brother Balin thought this was very silly, but at least fishing might bring him some food. He gave Dwalin a little boat, packed some meals, and sent him on his way. Dwalin was a terrible boater. The oars made his hands sore, and when he tried to set the sails, he lost them like sheets off a clothesline. He ate his lunch and then decided he'd have just as much luck fishing right there as anywhere. He was also terrible at fishing. He cut his fingers on the hooks, and then once when he thought he'd caught something, it turned out to be an old soggy boot. He sighed, ate his dinner, and decided to rest. It was very nice on the boat. It was a warm summer night with a full moon. The waves made gentle noises all around, and the boat rocked slowly like a cradle. Dwalin looked up at the moon and let his hand trail in the cool, sweet water. At midnight, the moon began to turn dark. First it looked like a shadow black on the moon's pale circle, but when the change had come over the entire moon, it flared into a new color, red and dimly gleaming, like fire embers on the hearth. Then suddenly all around Dwalin, the water was alive with bright fish. They sculled the surface with their fins and stuck their heads out to look at the moon. The waves they made caught the light and turned the water into a web of reflected gold. Dwalin sat up to look, and then like a dreamer, he stood and walked to the prow of the boat to get a better view. It was the most beautiful and strangest thing he had ever seen. But because Dwalin was terrible at boating, he leaned too far to one side and went splash down into the water. Nori, who for a goldfish was very kind, said, "We have to help him," because Dwalin, being a dwarf, sank like a stone. Nobody came at first, so Nori, who was only little, followed Dwalin down into the depths. He knew that if he kissed Dwalin, he could turn him into gold, but was not clear if Dwalin would survive that, so he didn't. But at least he followed him, singing encouragement and hope in fish language as they went deep. The other goldfish heard and were ashamed of themselves, putting moon watching ahead of saving a life. One by one they followed Nori and Dwalin down to the bottom of the water, where there is no light at all. And by dozens and scores and hundreds and thousands they pushed themselves under Dwalin's body and bore him back up to the surface. The moon had gone back to white, whatever strange magic being gone. Dwalin gasped as he reached the surface. It was like coming out of Mirkwood and he could breathe cold moonlit air. He scrabbled at his boat, and the fish all helped keep it upright as he scrambled in. When he was done coughing, he turned to look out over the water, and only one goldfish had stayed. Everyone else knew they had done what they could, but Nori wanted to make sure Dwalin was all right. Dwalin was not very clear on what had happened at all, but there was the prettiest copper fish watching him from the water, and he was completely drenched. He called down, "Thank you, because I think you might have saved my life." Nori understood a little of the air speaking, so he swam closer. He could see that Dwalin was breathing and safe, and he was very glad. He wondered if Dwalin would like him to change something into gold, too, for a souvenir. Dwalin wasn't thinking about his fishing mission at all. He was only glad to be alive. He kissed his own fingers in thanks and reached down to give that kiss to the fish. Nori arched up to the water to press himself into Dwalin's hand, and when they touched, he turned into a dwarf. Fortunately, he was still quite little, and Dwalin had no trouble hauling him out of the water and into the boat, because Nori would surely have sunk otherwise. They sat in the moonlight and dripped at each other. Well, this will make a tale, Dwalin thought, though he didn't feel any wiser on turning into gold subjects at all. Then suddenly Nori leaned forward and kissed Dwalin back. He had never thought about being a dwarf, or really anything except for a goldfish, but kissing with lips is really much nicer than kissing when you're a fish. They kissed for a long time in the boat, with the waves lapping around them, and then they fell asleep. In the morning, Nori rowed back the boat to Dwalin's home. Having been a fish, he was very competent at anything near the water. Dwalin introduced Nori to his brother, and they set up housekeeping and lived happily ever after.
Good night, my dears. Good night, sweet dreams.
And there you have it. Did you like these stories? Tell me what you think. Call the voicemail line at 571-297-3325. Send me an email. Find me on Twitter. All those ways to contact me can be found on the podcast website at nobilis.libsyn.com. And if you're not supporting Nobilis Erotica, then you're not getting the whole podcast. Sign up at patreon.com/nobilis to get monthly exclusive bonus content in audio and ebook form. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.